In case you haven't heard, Democrats hate America. At least that's what Trump and his MAGA followers say. We know that's not true, but do they? Do they believe that we hate America? Or is it all just lies to stay in power? To be sure, the Republican leaders and their media sycophants are deliberately lying. However, I think that our most promising approach with voters is to assume that they're either misinformed about the principles and values of the Democratic Party, or they misunderstand the principles and values on which the country was founded, or both. Much of our work to date has been aimed at establishing credibility within our community and building the capacity to engage with voters in the run-up to the midterm election and beyond. And when we engage with voters, I believe we must be prepared to answer this question. What are the principles and values of the Democratic Party, and how do they align with the principles and values on which the country was founded? As Democrats, I think we understand our party's principles and values quite well, and I have nothing new to offer in that area. So tonight I want to help answer the other part of that question, the part about understanding what America stands for. To do that, I will offer what I believe are the true interpretations of the founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, so as to better understand the society the founders intended to create and the role of the national government in creating and sustaining that society. And along the way, I'll provide information that you might find helpful when refuting MAGA talking points. Before we get to the founding documents themselves, it's important to understand the context in which those documents were written. The Declaration was written only 160 years or so after Europeans first settled in the North American colonies. Not only had the colonists experienced firsthand the oppression of King George III, they also knew the family stories recounting the experiences of previous generations that had lived in the colonies and the conditions in the homelands that drove them to emigrate to the colonies in the first place. Conditions that were the result of rule by absolute monarchs, poverty, corruption, lack of opportunities, arbitrary, capricious law enforcement, and religious persecution. In the 1770s, the 13 original colonies actually had little in common. They had been chartered at different times, each had their own colonial government and their own relationship with the English government. And from the fishermen, the artisans, and shopkeepers of New England, to the sophisticated city dwellers of Philadelphia, to the plantation-owning slave masters in the South, the cultures were vastly different. While they traded among themselves, and after the skirmishes at Lexington and Concord in 1775, they were beginning to support the newly formed Continental Army, their only real experience working together was creating the Declaration of Independence. The men that led this movement for independence were brilliant, thoughtful, educated in law and philosophy, and deeply influenced by Enlightenment thought. Many of the founders could read Latin, Greek, and French, which enabled them to study the classic philosophical and legal works that contributed to the ideas that formed the foundation of the nation they sought to establish. On top of it all, representative self-government on such a large geographic scale and with a population having such diverse cultures and interests had never been attempted in all of recorded history. But in 1776, their immediate goal was to declare and gain independence from England. They would figure out the details of governing if and when they won. So we begin with the Declaration of Independence, the document that lists the colonists' grievances against the king and expresses the values and philosophy of the society that they aspired to build. Some of the words are familiar. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. As a practical matter, they probably just meant white men at the time. Since then, most, but certainly not all of us, have come to understand that all people are created equal. that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, rights that cannot be taken nor given away. All humans have these rights simply by being alive, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'll have more to say on this just a bit later. The next self-evident truth is less familiar, but it's the one that gets to the heart of the founders' view of the role of government. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The obvious question is, why would governments be required to secure rights that cannot be taken nor given away? The founders understood the difference between having a right and being able to exercise a right. While they believed all people had equal rights, they knew that the sources of power to exercise those rights were not distributed equally. Sources of power such as wealth, social and political connections, natural talents and aptitudes, physical or mental, their personality, their upbringing, the availability of role models. Their experience had taught them two things. People with more power flourished because they were able to exercise their unalienable rights. People with less power did not flourish, largely because the more powerful people worked to prevent the less powerful from exercising their unalienable rights. The most obvious example of this behavior is the denial of black people's voting rights during the Jim Crow era, which began at the end of Reconstruction in 1877. Through laws and violence, the white majority prevented eligible black men from exercising their recently gained right to vote. The data show that in 1877, about 90% of black men in the South were registered to vote. By 1940, that was 3%. The ongoing struggle for civil, workers, and women's rights confirms that the founders were right. So the proper interpretation of this statement in the Declaration of Independence is that one of the primary purposes of government is to restrain the tendency of people with power to dominate society by denying people with less power the opportunity to exercise their unalienable rights. Of course, conservatives do not accept this interpretation of the plain language describing the proper role of government. Many claim that protection of property is the primary purpose of government. This is based on a narrow and, I would say, incorrect interpretation of a statement by John Locke, one of the Enlightenment philosophers whose writings had great influence on the founders. In his second treatise of government, he wrote, "The great and chief end of men uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property." Now, at first glance, this seems to support the conservative stance. However, what they ignore is that to Locke and the founders, property was everything a person has rightful ownership of: life, liberty, and estate. Basically the same things that Jefferson spelled out in the Declaration. James Madison also adopted Locke's view, describing property as including not only material goods, but opinions, religions, and personal rights. Everything a person could rightly call their own. This difference in interpretation is the root cause of the fundamental tension between conservatives and progressives concerning the purpose of government. Having declared independence from England and stated the principles and values of the new nation, the colonies were faced with the task of governing themselves, and this forced them to confront a philosophical dilemma. The Declaration of Independence itself argued against the concentration of political power in the hands of a national government, yet the national government needed to be strong enough to maintain obedience to national laws over the currently settled areas on the East Coast and the vast western lands that they foresaw becoming part of the nation in the future. Their first attempt at self-government was the Articles of Confederation, produced in 1777. Following so close on the heels of the Declaration of Independence, it emphasized the sovereignty of each state over the reuniting of the states, and that led to a weak national government, barely able to provide for the needs of the Continental Army. After gaining independence, their experience with the Articles of Confederation made it clear to the founders that a stronger national government would be required. In 1787, a Congress was convened to revise the Articles of Confederation. The delegates quickly agreed that the Articles could not be fixed and proceeded to start over. The product was the Constitution of the United States. Just imagine for a minute the task that confronted the founders that summer in Philadelphia. They were literally inventing a form of government that had never been attempted on this scale in all of recorded history. There was no how-to manual. They did understand that the rules of government they were writing would require adjustments and interpretations as time passed and situations changed. And they dealt with this in two ways. They provided a process for amending the document in Article 5, and they wrote a preamble expressing the purposes or objectives of the document, which would serve as a guide for interpretation. The preamble begins, "We the people of the United States of America." The framers purposely chose not to write "We the States," to make it clear that this was not simply a confederation of states, but a nation, in which the ultimate power to govern rested with the people as a whole. Next came the 6 objectives the founders hoped to accomplish with the Constitution, along with some commentary. In order to, number 1, form a more perfect union, this was simply a statement of their intent to cure the weaknesses of the Article of Confederation by creating a stronger national government, but within the values expressed in the Declaration of Independence. Number 2, establish justice. Create a system whereby all people's actions were judged by a common set of laws instead of the personal whims of the king. This included courts, equal protection, due process, impartial judges, trial by jury, access to counsel, no cruel and unusual punishment, so forth. Number 3, ensure domestic tranquility. Establishing justice and providing fair opportunities would go a long way to accomplish this. Number 4, provide for the common defense. This describes the powers to declare war, negotiate and approve treaties, use of militias, army, navy, etc. Number 5, promote the general welfare. The federal government was to act in a way that benefited all people, not just the wealthy and powerful. This, of course, connects back to the purpose of government, to secure these rights and helps ensure domestic tranquility. And finally, number 6, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. This states their belief that a government based on the principles of the Declaration of Independence and designed to achieve the goals listed in this preamble is most likely to yield prosperity, personal freedom, and an enduring society. So far, we've looked at the principles and values embodied in the founding documents and refuted some conservative talking points along the way. Let's deal with 2 more of their talking points. First, America was founded as a Christian nation. This is absolutely false. Recall that many immigrants at that time period were motivated to come to America to escape government-sponsored religious persecution. The founders saw religious liberty as a natural right, grounded in reason and conscience, that should be free from government coercion. John Adams said, "Nothing is more dreaded than the national government meddling with religion." While many of the founders were religious people, all of them saw the dangers of government based on religion, and the evidence supporting this is very clear. The First Amendment prevents the government from supporting religion. Article 6 of the Constitution states, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification for any office or public trust under the United States." And in the 1797 Treaty of Tripoli, which ended the war with the Barbary states of North Africa, it stated, "The government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion," a treaty that was ratified unanimously by the United States Senate. The second talking point and final talking point is that the founders intended to form a limited government. The founders did believe in limited government, but their idea of limited government meant that the scope of the national government's jurisdiction would be limited to specific areas of responsibility. Article 1, Section 8 lists these as regulate interstate commerce, defense, levy taxes, borrow money, coin money, enact laws on naturalization, create post offices, promote the progress of science and useful arts through patents and copyrights. That section also states the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. The Constitution does not limit the power of the government to act within the realms specified. In other words, the national government can be as large as needed to effectively manage these areas of responsibility. To limit the national government's power to act, they separated those powers between three co-equal branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial, and each would have the power to check the other two. They also included the 10th Amendment, which states the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. A quick summary and then a closing thought. I hope it's clear that the principles and values of the Democratic Party are most closely aligned with those of the founders. From the beginning, the national government has been a balancing act. The founders knew they needed to create a national government strong enough to restrain the excesses of the most powerful, so as to provide a measure of equality for all people, while avoiding the tyranny of unchecked governmental power, thus the separation of powers in the 10th Amendment. Traditional conservatives defined limited government to mean a government weak in all areas of responsibility, as they sought to minimize the restraints on the most powerful. Fewer regulations, smaller government budgets, reduced social programs. The well-known economist John Kenneth Galbraith said, "The modern conservative is engaged in one of man's oldest exercises in moral philosophy. That is, the search for a superior moral justification for selfishness." Trump and his Project 2025 handlers are not traditional conservatives. They have destroyed the separation of powers, thus embracing the tyranny of unchecked national government power in order to actively promote the excesses of the most powerful and minimize equality for the people. Exactly the opposite of the founders' intentions in every possible way. An examination of American history will show that when progressives controlled the government, the country moved toward the founding vision. From Social Security to civil rights to the Affordable Care Act, Democrats have led that work. And when conservatives were in charge, the country moved away from that vision. Democrats are unquestionably on the founders' side of history. Democrats love America. And now that final thought. Like generations before us, we are called to keep the promise of the Declaration of Independence and make those self-evident truths real for more people. My wife gave me this button that says, "I really wish I weren't living through a major historical event right now." But I am, and we are. And this isn't how it had to be. We all worked very hard to elect Democrats and save democracy in 2024. And it certainly isn't how I plan to spend my retirement. I thought there would be more fishing and campfires and empty beer cans. So I get pissed off sometimes, especially when I watch the news and hear about the latest illegal or stupid or cruel or corrupt or dangerous actions taken by this administration. But then I remember that the signers of the Declaration pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the cause of representative self-government. Hundreds of thousands of young men in my parents' generation were called to fight and die to defend representative self-government from tyranny in World War II. Many in my generation were called to suffer beatings and death to return voting rights to black people. I'm not asked to be in the first wave ashore at Omaha Beach or to have my skull cracked trying to cross a bridge in Selma, Alabama. I'm simply asked to get out of my comfortable retirement and do everything I can. Protest, write, donate money, engage with voters, and yes, even make balloon animals in order to preserve the government and the society the founders envisioned and that the American people have worked toward achieving for the last 249 years. I can do that. We can do that, and we all must do that.